So speed skater.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. My father was West Indian, born in Barbados, and became a speed skater. Go figure that one out. You know? And then my son was a speed skater as well.
Pretty impressive. Well, I have to say, clearly you've left political life because nobody from your staff requested that the room be 67 degrees and that you have an opening and closing statement.
Wait, it's not 67 degrees?
It's not 67
I'm out of here.
Well, I want to say, send our condolences to you for the, our condolences. The Mets, your Mets. Was that a hard loss?
Yeah, that was really hard.
You're a big Mets fan.
Yeah, they gave it away. You know, I mean, they could have won 2 of those games. All right, you know, the throw, guy would have been out, game's over. You know, I was at the '86 game. Not one of my claims to fame, was at Shea Stadium, and my brother and I walked out of that game, the Mookie Wilson, Bill Buckner game, because I said, I'm not going to watch the Red Sox jump up and down on Shea turf. So we walked out of Shea Stadium and walked home to East Elmhurst, where I was from, walked into my house, and my father's going, can you believe that? Can you believe it? I'm like, what are you talking about? And then, so, never leave before it's over.
Never leave before. It's bad luck, people say. Bad luck.
Right.
You could have been the reason for the loss.
They won when I left, you know.
Right, there was that.
Follow me at this time.
But they got that. You know, in the U.S., football's big, baseball's big, basketball's big, soccer not so big. So a lot of people want to know, why should the U.S. government go after FIFA?
Well, I had to be kind of careful of what I say here, because I was involved in the investigation. But let's just kind of maybe take a step back. That if you look at football/soccer, it is something that is worldwide in its dimensions. It is it's a huge entity that has. If it were a business, there'd be no. If you know, just a regular corporation, there'd be no question that people would say, you know, that's something that is legitimate, of legitimate law enforcement interest. The fact that it is wrapped in the patina of sports, soccer, seems to me doesn't make it any less a legitimate law enforcement target, especially given the impact that that FIFA has, that soccer has around the world. Big business, cultural component to it, political components to it as well. It's something that I think is worthy of you know, a law enforcement look, if appropriate.
What would you say to critics or cynics who say this whole investigation is solely because the U.S. didn't secure the 2018 or 2022 World Cup? All
right, well, I have to be totally upfront about this. I was part of the delegation that sought to get those the World Cup games. President Clinton and I and Morgan Freeman went over. So the fact that we did not acquire the games with that high-powered team that included me was clearly an indication that something was amiss. No, just kidding, folks. Just kidding. That was not the basis for that. No, it wasn't. It's not a function of us not getting, you know, the World Cup. There's a legitimate basis for the interest that was demonstrated by the actions that were taken. And I think it's also an indication, if you see how it is played out, really good worldwide cooperation between people in law enforcement from a variety of countries looking at this, I think, very legitimately.
Do you think, is there a timeline for the investigation? Do we have a sense of what to expect in the...
I left on April the 27th, so you'd have to talk to Loretta Lynch about timelines.
Can we phone her? Phone a friend?
514-5000. 202.
Do you, based on your knowledge, do you think Stepladder, there will be something that comes down against him? Do you think that he'll be charged?
Hard to say, you know. I'm sure that the investigation is going to be a thorough one, and that I don't think anybody, because of their position, will be immune from you know, a very legitimate and thorough inquiry.
Watching any sort of sporting event in the U.S., it's very hard not to see a commercial for FanDuel or DraftKings. Do you think these websites are considered gambling?
That's a good question. You know, I'm not sure, and I'm not trying to evade the question. I'm really just not sure. From my own perspective, I look at it and think there is a skill component to it. Even on the, you know, the weekly thing, we have to figure out, you know, what players you're picking and all that. But every person that I've spoken to seems to think the opposite, that in fact it is gambling. And
On the website, they say this isn't about a game of chance. It's
Yeah.
about skill. There's a level of skill, so it's not gambling. But would you side with that? Do you think it's not gambling? Do you?
I'm really just not sure. You know, I don't. There's a part of me, my gut kind of says that there is, as I said, a skill component to it, and that's important in terms of the statute.
Yeah.
If you can say that there's a skill part to, participation, takes it out of the gambling definition. And so I'm not really sure. I'm just not sure at this point.
Do you think Nevada got it right by saying you've got to have a license for this? You can't just come in and launch this and do this in our state.
Yeah, I think there is, gambling or not, I think it's a legitimate thing to say that given the amounts of money that are involved, the number of people who are involved, that some kind of oversight, some kind of regulation is appropriate.
Let's talk about badasses, according to the President of the United States, U.S. national women's soccer team. I love one of my favorite topics. Why is it so hard for women who are incredible athletes to be taken seriously in any sort of sporting event, whether it's women in college basketball to those in playing soccer who are just tremendous athletes?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a cultural thing that we have to overcome, and I think we're slowly but surely kind of overcoming it. You think about the great female athletes of the past, Althea Gibson, Maureen Connolly, who didn't get, I think, didn't get near the recognition that they deserved. Whereas, female tennis stars now, for instance, I think are recognizable worldwide figures. The fact that the women's soccer team didn't get maybe all the recognition that they deserve, I think is a function maybe more of their sport than the magnitude of their achievement. However, I will say that there's still a deficit between attention that is given men and that is not given to women. And as I said, I think it's a cultural thing that I think slowly but surely we're getting beyond.
You have two daughters.
I do.
They played sports in school. Was it difficult? How is it as a dad when you're trying to push girls through soccer or whatever sport it is and getting them to take it as seriously, because it's so much easier for the boys. You can just naturally push them into these sports. But for girls, what advice would you give parents?
Well, it was pretty easy for me. I mean, my girls wanted to participate in soccer and then in field hockey and track. Those are kind of their sports. And there were no barriers put up. And so as their classmates decided to be involved, I think initially they all wanted to have just the uniform. Everybody wanted to have the cool uniforms.
Yeah.
But then they kind of got into it.
Yeah.
And then it became, you'd see them come off the field after a goal or something with the high fives and all of that. And they became, jocks. Yeah. And so I think, again, culturally, we are getting to a point where we expect and support our girls to be involved in sports.
One sport that doesn't really have much access for women, the NFL, from domestic violence to Deflategate. Do you think that the integrity needs to be restored to the NFL?
Well, I don't think the integrity necessarily has been removed from the NFL. I mean, there's certainly incidents that are of concern, but I think the league has done a pretty good job in dealing with them. It'll be interesting to see what the courts do with on the whole Deflategate question as to the commissioner's authority. There's an appellate court now that will say whether or not the district court judge was correct. But the league struggles with these issues of domestic violence in the same way that our society does. You can't take sports leagues, sports entities out of the societal context in which they operate. And we as a society are struggling with, how do you deal with problems of domestic abuse? What do you do to the abusers? Do you give sufficient support to people who are the victims of those crimes? All things that we as a nation are dealing with.
There seems to be somewhat of a double standard. If you are a superstar in the NFL and you are riding high in your career, sometimes it seems as though the NFL can kind of cast a blind eye. I remember it was Lawrence Taylor, Hall of Famer, who said something along the lines of, when I was a star in the NFL winked at my drug problem. But once I left, they stared me straight in the face. How do you address these superstars who some people feel are getting away lightly?
Well, again, I'm not sure, I love LT, and there's a documentary that I saw on him that everybody should see. You got to and that last line is classic that I can't repeat here. But I'm not so sure that that's true. I mean, as I remember, there were a couple of suspensions that I think he had for drug use, as I remember. I'm not totally sure of that. And with the testing that goes on now, I'm not so sure that, regardless of your status, you wouldn't be held to, the appropriate standard, whatever, 3 months, 6 months, whatever the standards are that they've worked out through the collective bargaining agreement with the unions. I'm not sure that your status necessarily protects you to the degree it might have, in the past.
So if you were to grade the NFL on the way they've dealt with scandals, what grade would you give them?
Well, I'd say I think they've done pretty well, there's always the ability to look back and say you wish you'd done things differently, done things better. And that's true, so you learn from the way in which you did things. I'm sure that through the whole Deflategate experience and from the other things that have been kind of percolating around, Ray Rice, a lot of stuff, they'll be, the league has gotten to a better place, and I think confronted with similar fact situations in the future would do a better job. I suspect the commissioner would say that.
Why is integrity so important in sports? It's not something that's widely discussed. We play our sports, we watch our sports, but why is that such an important issue? Because
sports, it's way more than a game. It's in some ways how we. It's supposed to be the purest way in which we measure excellence. You time things, you score things, and given the impact that sports has on our society, it's something that should be pure, or as pure as we can make it. And when you have the influence of performance-enhancing drugs, the influence of gambling and people not performing up to their capabilities, that has a negative impact, obviously, on the game, the perception of the game. And I think given the impact of sports, it has a negative effect on our culture, on our society. So integrity is critical to, it's the foundation for sports. There's been a lot of attention when it comes to concussions in the U.S. How do you feel that concussions will affect American football here? I think that's a problem that is going to ultimately have to be dealt with. I think the protocols that are now in place are a good start. But I think you're going to have to understand in some kind of definitive way what's the long-term impact of participation in football. What's the long-term impact, and then to try to deal with whatever those studies say. Come up with ways in which you minimize that long-term impact. I mean, we're in a fundamentally different place than we were when I was following, the Y.A. Tittle, Charlie Connolly Giants back in the 50s and 60s. You got your bell rung. That was the term. You just went back out there, and if you didn't go back out there, you weren't a real good team player. So now we got a protocol. You're off for a week, number of days, whatever. Doctors have to certify. So again, progress is being made. What would you say when you look at the game overall, when it comes, whether it's football or soccer, there are a lot of concussions as well. They talk about helmets. There are new helmets that can tell you whether you have a concussion, but is that enough? I mean, should we invest in equipment? Is that the route to go? Or should we even be legislating what happens when it comes? I mean, should there be penalties for people who allow players to continue on with health injuries? I mean, what role should the government take when it comes to health issues in sports? Well, I mean, I think that, it's a fine line between having the government involved appropriately in some kind of oversight capacity. Certainly congressional hearings are a good thing. But you don't want government's hand, too heavily involved in sports. So some regulation, I think, is appropriate. Oversight is always a good thing. Questions about whether or not certain kinds of equipment should be mandated. I think, again, through the use of the appropriate use of congressional oversight, for instance, of sports leagues. I think that's a good thing. But I'm a little wary of government becoming too involved in sports. We've had a couple of panel discussions where people have talked about having a minister of sport, like other countries have had.
while we don't have a minister of sport, a lot of college coaches sort of have godlike status. They walk on water, whether it's locally in high schools or college or the NFL. We look at the University of Louisville, Coach Rick Pitino, who said, I had no knowledge that these players, these high school recruits, were being offered women and their fathers were being offered women. Do you believe Pitino?
Well, first off, if we do create a position of Minister of Sports, I would go back into government.
You would?
Yeah.
This would be the reason to go back.
That would bring me back from private practice back into government, That might be the one job to be better than Attorney General of the United States. Oh, yeah. Even though I said it should be a limited role that government plays, unless I'm Minister of Sports, and then I should be intimately involved in the running of sports. I don't know. I don't know, Coach Pitino. I just don't know whether that's what his degree of knowledge actually is. I guess that'll be something that we'll know as the investigation unfolds. It's pretty clear, though, that if those allegations are true, regardless of his knowledge, that's clearly something that should not have happened, cannot be condoned, and the program should be penalized in some, I think, really serious way, if it's true.
Do you think that the U.S. should have a position, Minister of Sport? Do you think that it warrants a level?
No, I was kidding before.
I know you were, yeah.
If I were the person, I'd say yes. But failing my appointment, I don't really think so. I think that I'd like to let the leagues, run themselves. You've got unionized players on the other side, so there's a good way in which there's an interaction there that promotes safety and good standards. But I think, as I said, there's a role for government to play in terms of oversight as opposed to direct involvement.
Mm-hmm. We've had a few, one incident recently of cyber attack of the Astros potentially hacking into the database. Would you consider, do you think there was some sort of wrongdoing done there?
Again, I'm not totally familiar with that, but to the extent that somebody's using cyber tools to gain a competitive advantage, then I think there is something. That is a place for government to come in and actually think about. You have to look at the facts, and decide, given the limited resources that you have, whether or not that is something that ought to be civilly or perhaps even criminally sanctioned. But that I think would cross the line.
That's the line. You think that's the red line? That if there was proof?
Yeah. If you're using cyber things, that I think would be something that I'd think about whether or not that there ought to be some kind of formal government
action taken.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. 2016, lots of people buzzing. It is the year of shattering the glass ceiling. Some people saying it's not going to happen in 2016. It's going to happen in 2019. Do you think Dr. Condoleezza Rice would make a great NFL commissioner?
Yeah. What happens in 2019?
Is that when Mr. Goodell is up? Am I wrong?
Oh.
Potentially? Am I correct? Yeah?
I didn't know. Okay. Yeah, I know her pretty well. She's a patient of my wife's, but I don't know any medical stuff about her. But
there's that HIPAA thing going on.
There's
right?
that HIPAA thing, and Sharon never tells me that kind of stuff. But she's clearly a knowledgeable person, in terms of sports, and football in particular. That'd be an interesting choice. It would be interesting to have a woman running the NFL. That would be an interesting dynamic. But I'm not sure that Commissioner Goodell has given any indication that 2019 is his last year.
You don't want to see him out?
Well, no. I know Commissioner Goodell. I think he's a good guy. A former Attorney General might be a good successor.
I was just going to say, would there be a little jealousy if someone else got that job?
Yeah. I'm older than her, a little wiser, perhaps.
Or we could talk 2017.
70?
17.
17.
17.
Okay.
2017.
I might not be around in 2070, so, for whatever job you're about to talk about.
I was going to talk about the potential job of a man named Barack Obama.
Okay.
Do you think you would ever see him in a capacity of NBA commissioner? He loves his basketball.
No, he doesn't want to be NBA commissioner. He wants to be a starting guard for the Chicago Bulls. Screw that administrative stuff. He wants to be played.
He wants to be on the court.
Yeah, he's actually transitioning, as I already have, from the hard court to the greens and fairways and stuff like that. People my age, and he's getting into that.
How
that
is he
category.
on the court? Do you think he could hang with them?
Yeah, he's pretty good.
Is he really that good?
Oh, he's pretty good. He's got a good left hand, jumper, drives pretty well. Although it's hard to tell, how effective he'd be without Secret Service protection with his driving. You don't want to hit that guy. He get no hard fouls on that guy. But no, he's got a good game. He's actually got a good game. And but as I was saying, transitioning, and so people our age. I'm 10 years older than him, but people are playing basketball at our age, or people their Achilles. That seems to be the thing I keep hearing. Achilles things are going, and knees, and your back gets messed up. So better to deal with a ball just on a tee and it's not going anyplace.
So do you think his golf game is better than his basketball game, or what would you say if you had to pick one?
I don't know. He's actually a pretty good athlete. I'm not sure. I don't. I've never played golf with him. So I don't know.
And if you played with him on the court, who would win?
Basketball?
Yeah.
People keep asking me this question, and always trying to get me in trouble with a guy who was my boss and who still.
But he's not your boss right now.
Yeah, but he has the nuclear codes. He could vaporize my house, or have me disappear, something like that. It's an easy thing for you to say. I got to go home, and the next people are knocking on my door,
We're not going to tell him. It's just amongst girlfriends today.
All right, so turn the cameras off, okay? As I said in my confirmation hearing, Senator Cole asked me, in my confirmation, because this was a critical question, could you play with President, could he hang with you? And I said, well, here's the deal, I'm from New York City, the home of Nate Tiny Archibald, Julius Dr. J. Irving, Herman the Helicopter Knowings, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lou Alcindor. I'm from PS 127 in Queens. I was the king of the 127. He's from Hawaii. He's from Hawaii. He's from Hawaii. Now, he's a good ball player, but, he comes from a foundation that's not quite as solid as mine, I don't know, how many NBA stars we have from Honolulu?
I almost feel like
Cameras are off, though, right?
Exactly.
If you don't see me like by Friday, please come look for me.
What is it like, though, after such an intense job? What did you do after? What did you do your first day after leaving AG position?
It's interesting. I really got back into sports.
Did you
all kidding aside, in a serious way. My son was a speed skater. He was also a fencer. He was a soccer player until he realized, wow, I'm 6'4", I'm an African American. Oh yeah, I think I like basketball. Really? Okay, finally, let's do that. He was, given his size and his abilities, that was my old age pension, but he's kind of squandered that, I think, a little bit. I'm going to redshirt this kid. Yeah. College is all about academics, just kidding. So I really got back into, just reading the sports pages in a way, that was how I started my mornings, which is what I had done before being AG, so I got back into that. And, I binge watched a lot of television, and a lot of the stuff was, sports documentaries. I was really kind of interested in that, so got back into sports in a major way.
So what would you say? Is there a favorite sport that you really love playing?
Yeah, basketball.
Basketball
for me.
Is it? Yeah.
I'm a staunch New York guy. I remember 1958 like it was yesterday. The Colts, the greatest game ever. I literally ran out of my house when Alan Amici scored that touchdown. My father had to catch me going down 101st Street. I was crying, I'm 7 years old, and he said, you're taking the sports thing a little too seriously here. And to this day, I hate the Colts. And the Dodgers, because they left me. They left me.
I know Nelson Mandela once said, I remember reading in his autobiography, that he would never say what team he's for and against, because he felt that it was so divisive.
Right.
And he actually used sports to unite a country in a horrific chapter.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say about that? Is there a healing process that can unite people?
Sure.
Through?
You look at the impact that various teams have had, for instance. Women's soccer team periodically has united the country. We all focus and get extremely patriotic when it comes to the Olympic Games. I mean, sports I know nothing about. You know, I want the Americans to win all the time. You know, I want to see the, you know, our flag hoisted. And then, you know, more seriously, you think about, you know, Joe Louis and Max Schmeling, Jesse Owens, you know, in the Olympics, John Carlos and Tommy Smith. I mean, these are things that controversial at times, but evoke national pride. It can be, you know, done right and given the appropriate circumstances, and with a proper athlete, sports can be a very unifying thing.
You know, with that belief, why don't you guys get the Democrats and Republicans to play a little basketball or football?
Well, they're not in Washington long enough to play. They just come in for 3 days and then they leave. You know, they live in their offices. They do all kinds of bizarre things now. That'd be interesting. They have a congressional, I guess, softball game, hardball game, I don't know, something like that. And I think, you know, that's probably a good thing, you know? I mean, the ability to interact with one another off the floor. It's hard to demonize somebody that you know? And that's why I think, you know, things like congressional basketball, congressional baseball, getting together in social settings would probably be a good thing.
For the first time since the World Cup in 2022, it'll be held in an Arab nation. But there's a lot of talk about how it'll be in August in Qatar, when it'll be like 130 degrees. There's still a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place. I know there's no precedent set for this, but do you think there could be a possibility that the games might have to be moved from Qatar?
Well, I don't know. They certainly dealt with that. I remember in their proposal that they were going to have air-conditioned stadiums and things of that nature to deal with the summer heat. And I guess there was at least some talk on whether they've actually done it, to maybe moving the games from August, or I guess maybe to December, and then the other possibility being that, you know, you move it out of Qatar. I mean, I would hope that they would be able to do what they said they were capable of doing. You know, it was a significant achievement for the games to be located there, and I would hope that they would go off as planned.
When you look back at the Lance Armstrong, he was an absolute national hero to this country until he wasn't. Do you think that while the government is going after FIFA, should more have been done to go after Lance Armstrong?
It's an interesting question. You know, it's an interesting thing. I'd say I'd be a little more hesitant there. We're talking about an individual who obviously has been shamed, has been disgraced, and that's a serious punishment. You know, there was money that was government money that helped support his team that we filed, you know, civilly to get back. I'm not sure a criminal sanction there would be appropriate. Certainly on the civil side, you know, I think the suits that we filed made sense. But, you know, FIFA it seems to me different in the sense that it is a worldwide entity, people from different parts of the world with a stated supervisory responsibility. I'd be a little hesitant to go after you know, individuals with the same fervor that I might go after an organization like that.
Looking back on your career, it's always much easier to look back and say, I wish I could have done this. Is there anything you look back and wish you could have done differently or taken back or changed, knowing what you know now?
We're talking about my career as an athlete?
I was actually referring to the Attorney General, but if there's an athlete portion, that too as well.
Well, no. As an athlete, I think I pretty much wrung everything out of this body that I could, which is why I ended up in law school. Things I could have done differently. You know, I mean, I think, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently, but I would hope for a different result after the Sandy Hook shootings, that somehow we could have gotten some pretty sensible, that were popularly supported, you know, gun safety measures in place. That's something that's still
Do you think it'll ever happen?
Yeah, I think it will.
You really do?
There'll be an incident, unfortunately, that will be so appalling, even more appalling perhaps than Sandy Hook, or the accumulation of appalling incidents that will finally give backbone to people in Washington to pass legislation that they know the American people support. And I think you'll probably see a lot more action on a state level, where I think you'll see state by state these kinds of reasonable measures put in place.
And when can we expect the face-off between you and President Obama on the court? I think ESPN would be interested.
Okay, yeah, that might be a pay-per-view event. That would be, remember the Sylvester Stallone, Robert De Niro movie, these guys, over-the-hill fighters who got into the ring, Now, we're not that bad, but it wouldn't be the two of us at our best, and I think I'd like to just have people think about, the memory of Eric Holder, as I said, at PS 127, as opposed to the reality that you might see on television. Though, I will say that on a trip to the Willie Mays Boys and Girls Club in San Francisco, it's on YouTube, so you can see this. You'll see me fully dressed. I think I had a jacket tie, maybe even these shoes. I hit about a 12, 15-footer, and with the telling of it goes out, it's about an 18-footer now. Nets, So go to YouTube,
Check
put in
it out.
Eric Holder, San Francisco, basketball shot. So
We're going to see if it turns viral overnight or not.
I'm trying to make it viral. Every place I go, I talk about this,
Mr. Holder, thank you so much. We never get a chance to really talk sports, and thank you for making the time to come out.
Right.
Everyone was very excited to have you wrap up this conference
All right.
together, so thank you.
Well, thanks for having me.